Today, Gemara on Daf Pei Beis Amud Aleph, 5 lines down from the top of the Amud, where it says Higdilu lo yishafech. This goes back on the Mishnah that says the person that buys only 2 trees in a field, so then the buyer only gets the trees. He doesn't own any of the karka around. So in such a case, when the branches of the tree are spreading out, so then the owner of the ground is not allowed to cut them off, because it's understood that he's buying the trees in order to have those trees, including with the branches. Then the Mishnah also said that if there's branches that grow out from the trunk, it belongs to the buyer. But if there's branches that grow from the sharoshim, from the roots, that belongs to the balakarka, the seller. So the Gemara explains, Heichidami minageza. Where, at what point of the tree do you say that this is the trunk? And at what point is it the roots? So Rabbi Yochanan explained, Kol sheroye pnei achamo, any part of the tree that's exposed to the sun, meaning it's above ground, zeh menageza, that's the trunk. If it doesn't see the sun, it's under the ground, zeh menasheroshin, that's the roots. Okay, but now it's mashma b'pashtus. What happens here is that the owner of the tree, he gets the branches that grow out from the trunk, and he can keep his branches. They can grow, they grow fruits, whatever it is. But the Gemara asks on this, the leichish, why shouldn't we be concerned that the following could happen? Dilma maska ara sirtain. Maybe what would happen is that a flood or through water, so the level of the ground gets lifted up by sediments or whatever else that comes to this area. And now, when you have these branches that are very close to the bottom of the tree, so when the level of the ground goes up, so now it looks like the branches are actually growing straight out of the ground. And then what happens is, it's considered to be, it looks like 3 different trees. And now the buyer says, Tlose zavinisli, you sold me 3 trees here, and if so, ve'isli ara. So if I have 3 trees here, then I get a piece of the ground as well around it. As the halach is, as it says in the end of the Mishnah, that when you buy 3 trees, you do get the ground around it. So why wouldn't be concerned that this would happen? The Rishonim discussed this question of the Gemara. What's the big deal? Just dig a little bit, and you'll see that it's branches from a tree. It's not 3 separate trees. So from the Gemara's question, what some Rishonim say that from the Gemara's question, it seems that in such a kind of case, where you have 3 branches that are growing from the same tree, but it's covered with earth, that it looks like it's 3 separate trees, you do get ground. So even if they would dig and they would look, they would see that it's all coming from the same tree, it doesn't matter. He'll still get from the ground. So therefore the Lekeach here in such a case will come and claim that I bought the trees this way, the way it is today, and therefore I get the ground there. Another detail that Rishonim discussed, so what's going to happen in such a situation where there's an argument between the buyer and the seller, whether he should get karka or not. The halach is always going to be, the buyer is going to have to prove that he bought the karka this way. So, but even if you're going to say that, so there's also a discussion about this. Some Rishonim say, true, the halach is but the fact that he's causing this problem, that he's taking him to a bezdin, is already a big issue. So it shouldn't. It's a way. Yeah, it's always the time. So why would Chachamim make a takon in such a way that you acquire the karka in this way, where the buyer can cause this issue?
When there has to be certain
distance between them. Oh yeah, the Gemara is going to discuss that soon. So over here, it must be that the branches come out in such a way, like they go pretty far. The Gemara soon is going to say, yeah, it's a pretty big distance, yeah, that it has to be in such a way that it can mamish look like 3 separate trees. So the Gemara says, so Rav Nachman says, Yokutz, that those branches that grow from the trunk so close to the ground, they belong to the buyer, but he has to cut it off. He has to cut it off. He can use it for firewood, whatever he wants, but he can't leave it there because then this could be this problem. That he has to cut it off. Another halacha, Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, Nakitinon, we have the halacha that by a dekel, when it comes to the branches that grow from the trunk of a palm tree, em legeza, the buyer does not have rights to any of those branches that grow from this palm tree. What's the reason? Why is a palm tree different than other trees? So Rav Zvid thought to say that the reason is ein lo geza lebal dekel, that the owner, the buyer of this palm tree doesn't get the trunk, the branches that grow from the trunk. The kivin de lemachbar or l'sharish koi. When you buy a tree like this, when you buy a palm tree, what happens is after this palm tree dries up, it doesn't replenish. When the branches on the top dry up, it's not going to replenish again. So therefore, after it dries up, the tree is gone, and that's it. The buyer doesn't have anything else over here. So therefore, suchi masach daite. So when he buys such a tree, he lachatchila thinks that whatever branches are growing from the bottom, I don't need them. It's not. I have no tayelas. I have no benefit of it. By other trees, even if on the top the trees, the branches dry up, but from the branches in the bottom, it could regrow, it could replenish. So therefore, the buyer is thinking to himself that he wants those branches growing in the bottom when it dries up, so then it's going to replenish from those branches, but not by a palm tree. So therefore, he's not interested. So it's not part of the sale. He doesn't get them. That's the pshat that Rav Zvid said. Rav Papa, on this Rav Papa asked, but v'hakoine shnei ilonos in the Mishnah, when it says that if you buy two trees, and the Mishnah says that you get only the trees and you don't get the ground, and the Mishnah talks about all kinds of trees. It doesn't make a distinction between one tree and another. It talks even about palm trees as well. And that, nevertheless, the Mishnah says the yesh legeza, that it does get any branches that are going from the trunk. It's mashma from the Mishnah that it is including even palm trees. This is the Rashbam's pshat in the Mishnah, in the Gemara's question here, that is. Taisus has a different pshat. Taisus has a few different pshatim here in the Gemara. One of the pshatim of Taisus in the Gemara is, if the Gemara is asking that if this is the reason of what Rav Nachman said, like Rav Zvid's explanation, because the palm tree, after it dries up, it doesn't grow back again. The question of Rav Papa is, that's true not only about a palm tree. There are cedar trees, there are other trees that this has the same nature. Once it dries up, it doesn't grow back again. If so, when the Mishnah says stam, a din, about two trees, that you do get the branches that grow from the geza, from the trunk, there's not only the palm tree. According to the reasoning of Rav Zvid, there are many other trees as well that you shouldn't get the branches. And the Mishnah does not make this distinction. So Rav Papa gives a different reason. Ein lo geza lebal dekel. The reason why the one that bought the palm trees does not get any of the branches that grow from the trunk, lefisha ein moitzi geza. Because it's not usual b'chlal. It's not the nature of a palm tree to grow branches at the bottom. The palm tree grows the branches all the way up. We had before in the Gemara that in order to get the fruits from the palm tree, the dates, you have to go up with a rope. You can't climb up on the branches. So since it's not the derech for it to come out of the tree, so therefore, even when it does grow, it's not what was part of the understanding that the buyer is getting these branches. So the Rashbam's pshat here is that it's understood that the Mishnah wasn't talking about a palm tree when it spoke about branches coming out of the trunk, because it's not normal for a palm tree to produce branches there. Now the Gemara asks, so according to Rav Zvid's pshat, kashim asnisen, how does he answer this question that we asked from the Mishnah? Where in Mishnah it's mashma that even by a palm tree you do get the branches that grow from the trunk. And says the Gemara, the Zav and L'chomishnin. In the Mishnah, it's speaking about a case where you set a number of years. You made up that for the first 5 years, I have the rights to this tree. Which means even if it dries up, he's still going to have the right to replant over there. So therefore, in such a case, he's interested in having the tree or anything that comes from the tree within this time period of 5 years. But if he didn't set a time, then you say that whatever grows from the bottom of the tree, he doesn't need them, he doesn't want them, because the tree is going to dry up. And then when it dries up, he doesn't have any tayelas in the tree anymore. In the next case in the Mishnah, it said, Kono, Shloisha, Kono Karka. If you buy 3 trees, so then you get the piece of the land around the tree as well. Kamo, how much do you get? You get the rights to the karka that's under the tree, to replant if this tree dies, and between the trees, and the chutzalahen. And also outside of the trees, around the trees, how much space do you get outside around the trees? As much space as is needed. The oida is by a fig tree. When you have someone that's cutting and collecting the figs from the tree and his basket, to be able to walk around to collect from the tree.
How far is it the trees can be?
Between the trees, the Gemara is soon going to discuss the space between the trees. I don't know if we're going to learn it today, but it's a discussion later in the Gemara.
Can be too much.
Yeah, if it's too, the Gemara is soon going to discuss. Maskef Rabbi Lazar. So Rabbi Lazar asked on this halacha that was brought here in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. If in such a case, when you buy 3 trees in someone's property, a pathway to go to these trees, you don't get in the property. So the Bach scarcity here in the Gemara is the ara achritihi. The reason why you don't get a pathway is because the 3 trees that you bought in this property, with the karka for these 3 trees, it's like a different karka. It's like a different territory. So this is similar to the halacha of a person that buys a pit in someone's property, or he buys some territory in the middle of someone's property. you get that separate territory, but a pathway to go to your territory there in middle, you don't get that pathway. The Gemara here is saying this because it's quoting the opinion of the Chachamim. We had it earlier in the Masechta, the Chachamim say in such a case, a person that sells ba'ayin ra, and he's not giving you a pathway. So over here as well, when a person buys 3 trees in someone's karka, so it's ara achriti. That area with the 3 trees is a separate, it's a different territory. So you don't get a pathway. It's not kamaloi oira v'sala yeshloi. Are you going to say that he does get the area to go around to be able to gather the fruits and to pick the fruits? If he sells it ba'ayin ra and you don't get a pathway, it's logical that he also is not interested in giving you space around the trees. If you have to get your figs, so you'll have to climb up the tree without walking around. You'll have to go up onto the tree to get your figs. That was the question that Rabbi Elazar asked. Now, the Gemara here says something on this question. As I mentioned, the question here was based on the opinion of the Chachamim that by 3 trees you don't get a pathway. Amar Rab Zeire, so Rab Zeire said, "Midivrei Rabbeinu nilmad." From what Rabbi Elazar said, we can learn out shloisha hudein loiderech. That when it comes to 3 trees, I say that the 3 trees is considered to be a separate property, and there you bought that, but you don't get a pathway to it, like the opinion of the Chachamim. But hashnayim yeshlei. But if you only acquire 2 trees in someone's property, there you don't get any rights to any karka, but a pathway you will get. Because when you buy a territory, not even territory actually, you're buying just trees within someone else's property, so it's trees that's not in my property. I'm buying trees in your property. Over here it's understood that I'm getting a pathway. Just like the trees I own, which is in your property, so do I get a pathway in your property to go to the trees. It's only when you're buying a separate territory within someone else's property, then I say that you get that territory and not the pathway. Because I bought something in your property, so therefore I have a pathway to go to my trees as well. Okay, but now the Gemara says, what do we see here? That Rabbi Elazar is paskening like the Chachamim. Shall we say that Rabbi Elazar less le the Shmuel Rabbi? That Rabbi Elazar is not paskening like Shmuel, which was his teacher, because the Amar Shmuel said Alacha ke Rabbi Akiva, that we pasken like Rabbi Akiva. The Amar moicher ba'ayin yafa moicher. When a person sells, he sells generously, and when you buy a karka with 3 trees, and you get a piece of karka with the 3 trees, you also get a pathway. So how would Rabbi Elazar ask the question that if you're not getting a pathway, you shouldn't be getting the area around the trees? According to Rabbi Akiva, you do get a pathway. So from his question we see that he was paskening like the Chachamim, that you don't get a pathway. Amalei, so he answered, no, it's not. Rove or Rabbe answered on this, that it's not a raya that Rabbi Elazar did not pasken like Shmuel. Here he's explaining Pshat in the Mishnah. Regarding this Mishnah, it must be Rabbi Akiva. Our Mishnah does not go according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. We see that our Mishnah holds when a person sells, he sells ba'ayin ra, with a stingy eye, not like Rabbi Akiva generously. How do you know this? Mimai, v'diktani, what does the Mishnah say? Higdilu, when the branches of this buyer of 3 trees, the branches grow out and they create a shade over the property of the seller around Yushape. The seller that owns the property around, there's a lot of cut off those branches. If you're going to say the Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva that says when a person sells, he sells ba'ayin yafe amay Yushape. Why would you say that the seller is allowed to cut off his branches that are creating a shade over his property? Ha'amar moicher ba'ayin yafe moicher. When he says that when you sell generously, so shouldn't that mean here as well that if you're selling someone trees and his branches are going to grow big out into create shade over your property, that's included in the sale, that he can keep his branches. You can't trim off his branches. So from the fact that our Mishnah says that you could trim off his branches, that shows that we're paskening like the Chachamim. That's why Rabbi Elazar asked the question based on the Pshat in this Mishnah. So he answered him and said, Nachman Yitzchak said, no, you can't prove from this that our Mishnah must be the Chachamim. Because when did Rabbi Akiva say this concept, that when a person sells, he sells ba'ayin yafe, when a person buys a pit or a cistern in someone's property, that you get a pathway to it, because the pit itself and the pathway as well, they're not causing any damage to the seller's property around. So we say that he sells him the pit and he sells him the pathway as well. But Gabi Ilon, mi shametle. But when it comes to a tree, you sell someone a tree inside your property, and now the branches of his tree are making a shade over his property, and it causes him a damage that he can't plant properly in that area. There's no sun there. Do we know that Rabbi Akiva in such a case says that you also sell generously even when it causes the seller a damage? Wouldn't Rabbi Akiva agree to Mishnah that it says, we learned it earlier in the Masechta here, by neighbors, and you have one person, he has a tree, and his branches are hanging over his friend's property. So if you're allowed to cut from his branches all the way to the height of the goad that you hold, that you use when it comes to plowing with an animal, and that goad it's like a pole that goes high up. So if his branches are blocking you from doing your work, you're allowed to cut off his trees. So over here as well, it's understood that according to Rabbi Akiva, if someone else's branches are creating shade over your property, and because of that you have damage, that Rabbi Akiva would agree that you can cut it off. So our Mishnah could go even according to Rabbi Akiva. And now the Gemara brings a brayse that says, like what Rabbi Yechanan said, Tanya Kavasei Rabbi Chia bar Abba, it said before in the name of Rabbi Yechanan regarding a person that buys 3 trees, what does he get? What karka does he get with the trees? Harei zakana tachteyen, you get the property under the tree, beineyen in between, and v'chutzalahen, and also outside around them, kimlo erev v'saleh, as much that is needed for one that's cutting figs and his basket. Amalei Abaye le Rav Yosef. Abaye asked Rav Yosef another shaila here. Oisan oire v'saleh. That area around the trees that the buyer gets to be able to walk around to collect the figs or whatever fruits they are. Mi zoira. Who has the right to plant there? If someone wants to plant vegetables there, who could plant there? Is it the owner of the trees or the owner of the karka? Meaning, even if you allow the owner of the karka to plant there, what that would mean is, but if the buyer of the trees wants to come and collect his fruits, he would be allowed to step over it. But the question is, in the beginning, who is the one that has the right to plant there? Amalei, so Rav Yosef answered to Nisua. We learned this in the Mishnah. The Mishnah speaks about a garden, and you sold to someone inside your garden, you sold to him a piece inside the garden. So now the halacha there is that hachitzen zereya esaderech. If the one that lives on the is the owner of the outside garden, and he sold the rights for the inside the garden, and he also agreed. He agreed willingly to give him a pathway to be able to go to his garden inside. But who has the right to plant on this pathway? Hachitzen, the outside one, zereh sadarech, he could plant the pathway. Right? So even if the one that has the inside garden will be allowed to walk over these plants that are planted in this pathway to get to his inside garden, but who is the one that has the right to plant there? It's the one on the outside. So the same thing we could say here, that the one that owns the karka around outside, he's the one that has the right to plant in this area around these trees. Amalei, Sabai says to Rav Yosef, Midami, how could you compare our case to that Mishnah? Hasam lesle pseidel lekeach. Over there, the buyer of the inside garden doesn't have any loss by the fact that the one of the outside garden is planting in this pathway. But over here, if we allow the balakarka around to plant in this area, right under the trees, so then the buyer could say, it causes me a damage. What's the damage? That the fruits of my tree, when they fall to the ground, when they're ripe, what happens? They fall to the ground on this vegetable garden, and this vegetable garden is dirty. There's also fertilizer there that makes my fruits dirty. So it's not just planting in a pathway. It's planting right under my trees that causes me a problem with my fruits. So therefore the Gemara says, Holy Dami ala l'seifa. Our case here is compared to what it says in the Seifa of that Mishnah. Over there in the Seifa it says that in a case where you buy a garden on the inside, and there's the seller or the outside garden does not give the inside garden any right to go through the property, and over there Bezdin is the one that forces them. The Bezdin says that you have to give the one in the inside garden a pathway somewhere from the side that he should be able to go into his garden. And there the Mishnah finishes off in that case, v'zeh, that both the buyer and the seller, the one on the inside garden and the one on the outside, einan hashoim l'zayra. They don't get the right to plant the area, the pathway. So over here as well we say that the buyer has the trees, and because it can cause them a loss, it doesn't have the balakarka around, does not have the right to plant there in this area. So it shouldn't cause a loss to the owner of the trees. Tanya Kvosei da Abaye, we learned like it said, like in a brayse, like Abaye said, Hareze Kona Tachteyen, that the Bala Ilona is the one that bought these trees, so he gets the karka under the trees of benein and between and v'chutzala and kamaloi oidel v'saloi saloi. Also get the area around to be able to collect and to take the figs. And then the brisa finishes off like Abai said, v'zeh einu nashal nazira. The balakarka and the balailonis, none of them have the right to go and plant in this area because it can cause damage to the fruits, and it's on the other hand though it's also the area that belongs to the balakarka. So none of them have the rights to go and plant there. The balailonis only has that area with one thing, for the rights to be able to walk there to collect from his trees, but he doesn't have the right to plant there. Okay, the next thing, the piece in the Gemara is going to discuss the in between the trees, the kamiyeh beinayim. But it's a hamshach in the whole sugya on Daf Pei Gimel. Hashem will learn.